Hey newbie, welcome to the family. Really glad you passed your assessment. Would have really hated to have you, removed. But you proved mentally malleable enough to work directly under the Council, the ruling body of the GCPS. You better keep that mentality up, because it's not really gonna get easier down the road. With congratulations out of the way, let's start with a bit of an info session, specifically about one of the biggest threats not only to the GCPS, but honestly every other sentient race in the galaxy. Today, let's talk about the Plague. So a couple of decades ago, the GCPS was doing what it's currently doing now, expanding to all corners of the galaxy, spreading out prosperity to the human race, and all the alien races that are wise enough to be under our umbrella. And one of these corners that humanity was racing towards was in the northwestern section of the galaxy, known as the Death Ark, called so because in that little cross-section of stars were numerous dead worlds, remnants of ancient civilizations that seemed to have been wiped out through means that were, at least to the explorers and colonists of the time, unknown. Not that it stopped humanity from pushing through. In our explorations, we had already seen numerous examples of the remnants of past civilizations, and chose not to be deterred by such signs of past failure. We were confident that humanity would succeed where so many others had failed. Onward humanity pushed, despite quite a few difficulties. There were tales of spectral warriors and of people being abducted, as well as the disappearance of whole colonies and survey teams, but humanity would push on despite the dangers. That was until the Council enforced a no-go zone at that corner of the galaxy, the entire Death Ark banned from colonization or even exploration. That declaration was seen as a rather aggressive move by the Council, since at the time, the Council, composed of the heads of the 7 most powerful corporations in the galaxy, wasn't the powerhouse it is today. It was more of an advisory council, settling disputes, or serving as a diplomatic corps for other corporations. This was the first time they used their considerable corporate muscle to enforce any particular edict amongst the corporations. There were 2 reasons why this no-go zone was established. The first is that the Council had already sent several teams to investigate these barren worlds, and what they found was alarming. These worlds didn't just slowly die out. There were signs of advanced civilizations falling into anarchy and collapsing almost instantaneously. Large-scale warfare using atomics, as well as other weapons with energy signatures they couldn't even fathom. Devastation that felt less like war, and more like genocide. The second reason was the Asterians. Now the Asterians are an ancient and rather aloof race, and unlike the Forge Fathers, they have no interest in trade or even expansion. They're focused mainly on their section of the galaxy, a race the GCPS isn't, at least for now, interested in antagonizing. So it was a bit of a surprise when the Asterians sent diplomats to speak directly with the Council, and not just any diplomats, but their ruling Tesseract, the leaders of their entire species. I don't know what they discussed with the Council, but it was enough to make them form an agreement with the Asterians. The corporations would respect the border of not only Asterian space, but also the Death Ark, and the Asterians would refrain from military sanctions, which I think is their polite way of saying they wouldn't blow us up. A border zone between the Death Ark and GCPS space was established, enforced by the Marauders who were still loyal mercenaries at the time. Any corporations that tried to go through this border zone had their assets seized and their license to operate ripped up, which to a corporation was a death sentence. Most respected this border zone, but a few resented this leash on their power, specifically House Grace. House Grace was an old corporation, with ties to the first colonies to leave the Sol System centuries ago, and with that sort of pedigree, it gave its leadership a sense of pride. The leading patriarch of the corporation at the time, Mayor Grace, did not appreciate being bossed around by an unelected body thousands of light years away, so he ordered House Grace ships to find a way into the Death Ark, circumventing the blockade, and once through, set up bases for further exploration and exploitation. He put on airs of doing this for the good of humanity, but most believe he wanted to create his own mini GCPS, wanting to lay first claims to worlds in the Death Ark before other corporations had the gusto to do what he did. Whatever his plans, they were short-lived, as the GCPS sent troops to House Grace worlds and tore the corporation apart, ending with the execution of Mayor for treason. Sadly, before this happened, at least 3 fleets of House Grace colonists and explorers were able to get into the Death Ark, and with the GCPS unwilling to go after them, those fleets had free reign in these new territories that were assumed to be their end, as despite years passing by, no signals from those colonists were ever received. Since the liquidation of House Grace, there had been many changes over the coming decades. There was the Mandrake Rebellion, where the Marauders rebelled and were barely prevented from wiping out the GCPS. The inception of the Enforcers, which well enforced the Council's grip on the GCPS, and the replacement of the Marauders on the border zone with said Enforcers, forming a new border force, known as the Long Patrol, to prevent people from trying to cross into the Death Ark. And it was during one of these patrols that they noticed a fleet of starships emerging from the Death Ark, some of them broadcasting the transponder codes of the missing House Grace expeditions. These starships launched a sustained assault at several points along the Death Ark, stretching the Long Patrol thin, as these vessels attempted to cross into human space. Despite the ships of this fleet being several decades old, the former colony ships did quite a bit of damage, mainly because those upon them had no sense of self-preservation. Many ships more than willing to commit suicidal ramming assaults to try to take an enforcer vessel with them. If those enforcer ships were lucky, they were simply destroyed. Those that were unlucky were boarded. According to the sporadic messages sent to the surviving ships, the creatures that boarded were once human, but were now savage and monstrous, many attacking in waves of rabid bodies, while others carried firearms and used rudimentary tactics. The scariest thing about these creatures, however, was that they were infectious. Those that were bitten or even just scratched would take only minutes to transform into another member of the Horde. Thousands of loyal crewmen that had worked with the Enforcers for years, suddenly turning into ravenous monsters that swarmed them. More than a dozen Enforcer vessels were destroyed or overtaken, and if it wasn't for the efforts of Colonel Nero Fasal, the entire fleet would have been lost. The Colonel quickly reorganized the scattered remnants of the Enforcer fleet, using strikes, feints, and counterattacks that enabled it to scatter the Plague fleet, then quickly moved to exterminate the remaining enemy vessels. Unfortunately, not all the ships were destroyed. A few were able to escape the extermination, and when it comes to the Plague, one ship of infected is all it takes to destroy a world. The first world struck was New Paris, a central world in the Soto sector that had been settled for many years. Its population largely bonded workers who were just hoping to build a home for themselves and future generations. When the Plague arrived, this colony became a charnel house. The few messages that reached the Council from this besieged world spoke not only of the deformed humans seen by the Enforcers, but also larger creatures. Massive beasts as big as transport wagons that could tear apart tanks with ease, leaping monsters that could gut entire units in moments, and even mutated animals and insects that overwhelmed whole towns with their numbers. Horrors upon horrors were unleashed that turned New Paris from a vibrant colony into a Plague hub that allowed the newly formed Plague monsters to board taken ships and fly off to other worlds in the sector. And as more worlds fell, half of all Enforcers in the galaxy and a substantial number of GCPS military forces were pushed into the sector to try to stop the spread. Eventually the spread was stopped, and the infected worlds of the Soto sector were cleared, but only with a protracted campaign to terminate smaller outbreaks as they occurred. I should note, the infected weren't the only thing causing massive damage on the worlds of the Soto sector. Panic and hysteria also had a hand in the world's destruction. Freighters were destroyed from orbit because of fear of infection. Refugees were killed by mobs of civilians, or even planetary authorities. By the end of the spread, 3 planets were rendered inhospitable due to biological and chemical weapons, and whole star systems had to be cut off from the rest of the GCPS. The Council took any measures they could to end what was begun by House Grace, including not letting the rest of the GCPS know what really happened. Everything was blamed from surprise star collapses, to even mislabeled dietary supplements. Anything to keep the news of the Plague from reaching civilization. That might seem overly controlling to you. Why not let the rest of the GCPS know of this danger? The problem with that is twofold. The first is that fear can be just as destructive as an invading army. The news of this new threat making the citizens react rather self-destructively. The Council learned long ago that humanity in the end needs to be protected from itself. The second reason is that this fear could cause stagnation. The Council knew that in order for the GCPS to survive and thrive, it must keep spreading, adding new worlds and resources to keep the corporate engine running. If the fear of the unknown made humanity hesitant to expand, the whole economy, and thus our governmental system, would come crashing down. If the Council had hoped that this would be the end of the Plague threat, those hopes were dashed, as a new vector for infection reared its ugly head. On a world far from the border zone called Adriana, it is believed that on that world, a team of scientists had uncovered an ancient alien ruin, and within, they discovered one of what would later be known simply as the artifacts. Strange objects of alien origin that have suddenly started appearing in recently discovered alien ruins, or even on planetary surfaces, as if placed there by some malevolent entity. Although each artifact varies in size and coloration, they are all objects formed from a mix of graphene and other exotic unidentified compounds, with some yet unidentified cuneiform writing upon them. Before I go on, I should probably talk a bit more about what we know about the Plague so far, its nature, and why it's so terrifying. The plague is unlike any microorganism ever seen by GCPS scientists. It can't be described as either a bacteria or a virus, and it also has no clear method of locomotion, but is still somehow able to move within a body and attach themselves to a cell. As for what's inside each of these cells, that has also been difficult to determine because they are tough as hell. Its plasma membrane able to resist the various ways scientists know how to break apart a cell, the amount of force necessary to break through, also enough to destroy any proteins that make it up, making a full analysis of its structure, at least for now, impossible. What we did discover is that the plague cell is somehow able to preemptively alter its surface structure to completely evade any immune response. In more layman speak, it seems that instead of simply mutating to adapt to a host's immune system, it's pre-programmed to circumvent the biologies of every known sentient species, as if having a memory of its genetic makeup, which, as you can guess, brings about all sorts of questions. The only known species not pre-programmed to the plague are the Marauders, which makes me glad we didn't wipe them out during the Mandrake Rebellion. Once an artifact is uncovered, it seems to hit anyone nearby with a concentrated dose of the plague. Most are killed almost instantly, choking on their own blood, and spasming in agony as the infection unsuccessfully attempts to rewrite the DNA. Those that survive turn into a Stage 1 infected. Most Stage 1 infected come in the form of the Plague Lord, a creature 4 meters in height, with an enhanced muscle mass and a bony exoskeleton. Furthermore, the brain stem, the part of your mind that's associated with muscle control and aggression, grows, while any parts of the brain people might consider human simply withers away. This creature is both monster and tactician, powerful enough to charge the enemy from the front, but cunning enough to control the hordes of the plague like a general. Besides the Plague Lord, there are currently 2 known types of plague creature that may be formed from an artifact infection, but like all known versions of plague monsters, it is assumed there are more that have yet to be discovered. The first is the Aberration, which is believed to be a failed attempt to create a Plague Lord that didn't result in the victim's violent death. Although nowhere near as cunning as a Plague Lord, it is larger, thicker armored, and to compensate for its larger weight, quadrupedal. It is essentially a tank with legs, and is able to rip apart its metallic counterparts with ease. The Plague Corruption is as cunning as a Plague Lord, and also as powerful as an Aberration, but is thankfully much rarer. Its 4 thick arms ripple with muscle, and its hide is festooned with wicked spikes. Additionally, its lower jaw can dislocate and split in 2, allowing it to swallow its victims whole. Once the Plague Lord is fully formed, it goes on a rampage, attacking anyone in its immediate area. Those that survive its attacks are infected, and turn into a Stage 2 infected, of which 2 variations have been recorded so far. The first are the Leapers, not very intelligent, but extremely fast and are instinctive pack hunters, and as the name suggests, are capable of leaping across a battlefield to tear apart their enemies in a frenzy of bloodletting. Another form of Stage 2 infected are Bursters, which are less armored and slower moving than Stage 1 infected, but still strong enough to rip apart a vehicle if it needs to. Its primary form of attack is to grip a victim with their barbed hands to infect them. However, it is also covered in pulsing blisters that burst when shot, splattering anyone nearby, and they can also shoot out a stream of infected liquid at nearby enemies. Whether bitten by a leaper or spewed on by a burster, the victims of these attacks are transformed into a Stage 3 infected. The most common form is that of the zombie, a mindless bestial former human that primarily shambles across the battlefield. They are tough, have long, dagger-like nails that can easily rip into flesh, and usually come in hordes that can overwhelm a position with pure numbers. Another form they may take is that commonly referred to as ghouls. They have more muscle mass and tougher skeletons than a zombie, and also retain at least some of their higher brain functions, allowing them to remain capable of handling standard-issue GCPS weapons, controlling vehicles such as tanks and starships, and using rudimentary military tactics. And that's just humans. Other sentient races as well as native animal life can be infected as well. However, it should be noted, while other races can be infected, only humans seem to have the wide variety of mutations that arise from infection. Now that you understand the dangers of the plague, you can understand the extreme measures the Council took on Adriana, and soon after other worlds that artifacts have been found. The Council ordered the world contained at all costs, and the eradication of all life forms on the planet, essentially making a dead zone. Sadly, these extreme measures isn't enough to fully contain the plague threat. Our analysts have identified several large plague fleets in the western side of the GCPS, with only one being identified as coming from the Death Ark, which means that somewhere in GCPS territory, at least 2 infections had gone unnoticed and fleets were formed. For now, all we can do is contain the threat as best as possible. The Enforcer is always on the lookout for news on the discovery of alien ruins, or strange disappearances, sending out Pathfinder teams to confirm the presence of the infected, and the plague fleets are constantly being monitored, those watching waiting for the opportune time to strike. So far we have been relatively successful, but nothing is 100% effective. Inevitably, a plague infection slips through the cracks, quickly forming a new force we have to contend with. Hopefully a solution is found soon, because one day, the plague problem will get so big that not even the council will be able to keep it hidden. And once that happens, all hell will break loose. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on the Plague, the futuristic army from the wargame Warpath from Mantic Games. Basically the Left 4 Dead. Is it Left 4 Dead? Yes. Left 4 Dead. What if the Left 4 Dead zombies had a futuristic army and basically wanted to, corrupt the rest of the galaxy? If you like this vid, please like, subscribe, comment, press the little bell, etc. so the YouTube gods know I exist and hopefully more people see my content. If you're inclined and you have a little cash in your pocket, also consider sending little money away to my Ko-fi or my Patreon. The extra money gives me a chance to work on these stories I love. Anyway, thanks for listening/watching, and see you next time.